we were going to solve our own problem and we were going to make money from day one. I wanted to know that we had a real business and that people were willing to put their money where their mouth is and they're willing to trade their money for the value that we were creating.
Hey, Bootstrappers! Welcome to Bootstrap Stories, the podcast where founders, marketers, and thoughtful leaders share the most actionable tips on building a successful business. After meeting with hundreds of bootstrappers in the past years, I figured out that we all struggle to grow our businesses. But the truth is that most of us don't know where to ask for help or advice. That's why I decided to start this podcast, to give you all the keys to succeed at every stage of your business. All the tested strategies for solving your struggles and taking your business to a new level. No fluff, no bullshit, only a real talk between friends that help each other succeed. Today, my guest for this episode is David Tintner, the CEO of ThoughtLeaders. David, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks, and it's great to be here.
Can you maybe let our audience know a bit more about your story, what does ThoughtLeaders does, and where you're at today?
Sure. So ThoughtLeaders is a platform for the creator economy. We help brands and publishers work together. And I got into the creator economy because I was a creator myself for a long time. I had a blog, a newsletter, a podcast, all about design and web development. And in doing it myself, I realized there was a ton of problems with the way that creators and brands were working together. So ThoughtLeaders really came about as a kind of a solution to my own problem and trying to fix that and help the relationship between brands and creators.
And when did you start it?
So ThoughtLeaders was officially founded in 2017, late 2017. But so you asked when did we start it? And actually, I started working on ThoughtLeaders probably a year or so before that. And the work as a creator happened probably 4 or 5 years even before that. So kind of nice. The official history of ThoughtLeaders goes back to about 2012. We just didn't know it at the time.
Nice. And so basically you started as a creator, understood the market, understood what was not working, and then you decided to launch ThoughtLeaders about 6 years, 5 to 6 years ago. And how big is the team now, and what's kind of the ARR range?
So we are about 40 people now around the world. We have our main office is in Tel Aviv in Israel, and we have people. We also have an office in the Philippines, and we have a few other people working all throughout the world. So last year we did about $8 million in revenue.
Nice.
Right now we are pacing at around $14 million. That's if I take the March revenue and I extrapolate that forward 12 months.
That's cool. Congrats. And basically how exactly did you got started and got kind of your first customers? What was your strategy from the start to grow and have such a growth?
So let me first be clear and say that I don't know that there was this crazy master plan strategy from the very beginning, right? So I don't want to paint this picture that from day one, everything was written down on the whiteboard. It's super clear. First, we're going to do this. Then second, we're going to do this. Third, the real strategy, if I can say, which was the strategy from the beginning, was that we were going to solve our own problem and we were going to make money from day one. That was really important to me. I wanted to know that we had a real business and that people were willing to not just sign up or not just become users or tell us they thought it was valuable. They were going to put their money where their mouth is, and they're willing to trade their money for the value that we were creating. That was super important for me for day one. In order to do that on day one, we obviously didn't have crazy technology built at the very beginning. So we started doing services, manual services, and essentially acting as a media agency where we were working with brands and helping them find the best places, the best creators, the best content creators to sponsor. And what we did over the years was we built the technology to make those manual processes much more efficient. And we also built the technology to do things that just are not possible to do manually. Those are the two areas that we focused our development on. And just over time, we just continued filling in the gaps. Okay, so this is the thing that's taking the most time. Let's automate it. Or this is something that would allow us to be way more accurate or predict way better. Okay, let's build it.
And you were mentioning before that you actually had like an audience that you built for about like 5 years with your newsletter and your, talking about design, talking about, web development. And what was it helpful for you to have this audience and then build up on it and get your first customers? Or did you just like started looking into your network and reach out to people?
Definitely. It was helpful for a few reasons. One, given, and this is probably pretty specific to us, but given that the thing that we were gonna sell was product and services around advertising in content, because we had our own content from the beginning, that was a real leg up compared to other people who were just, let's say, like the middleman. But that was just specific to us. But let's say if I take that kind of lesson and try to extrapolate it to what could be how an audience can be helpful and was helpful for us, but also to other types of businesses, because we had that audience, we instantly had street cred, first of all. So when it came time to sell something, there were people that were already willing to kind of like risk it a bit for us, right? Like anyone who's going to become your first customer has to kind of risk something. They don't know that you're going to deliver because you never delivered before, right? Not just for them, but for anyone. So when we went to those first brands and got them as clients, the very first brands were actually brands that had been reading our content and knew that the content was good. And then we were able to grow from there into eventually finding people that, weren't like readers or listeners or watchers of our content, but that's definitely how it started.
I think it's really interesting, to build up on your story about the fact that obviously, as you said, your first customers really need to trust you. And to build that trust, you created content that was showing them that you were the expert or thought leaders. And down the line, you position yourself as someone they could trust, and therefore the business relationship and hence them becoming clients was just really straightforward. I think it's a really cool takeaway because we see a lot of founders, especially in the early stage, that often struggle to get their first clients, and they don't think that content can actually be helpful because they're like, yeah, just go all in, and message people or whatever, which can work also, but building on your content and on your audience was definitely a smart move. And you mentioned that you were bootstrapping and that you bootstrap right now and on track, to reach 14 million this year. So what is what was your thought when started a bootstrap company? Were you from the start willing to do bootstrap because you wanted your freedom, or did at some point you felt you know what, there is always VC money, especially if you're, I think in Tel Aviv, it's also a really good startup hub. So what was your reasoning behind it?
So at the beginning, there was definitely this feeling of we are kind of bootstrap crusaders. I really wanted to bootstrap from the beginning. I didn't want VC money. It wasn't just about VCs. It was about, I didn't want anyone from the outside telling me how to kind of live my life, run my business. I wanted to do it with my co-founders. We wanted to do it ourselves. We wanted to be our own bosses in all aspects. That was one really important thing. The other important thing, that's just kind of a personality thing or maybe an ego thing. But the other thing that I think was really important to the business and why we really went with this was because in the space that we're in, software, advertising, marketing, it's a space where you can earn money early on. You can be charging. And if you're not able to charge money and do something that has like really focus your efforts on doing the thing that actually brings value for people, then you're kind of like you're doing something wrong. It's maybe there are spaces like biotech or you want to go into space. Like there are definitely industries or areas where bootstrapping doesn't fit, right? Like you just, you need a really heavy amount of capital in order to like get something off the ground.
Or you need to be named Elon Musk, but you have like tons of cash in the bank.
but look, in our case, 2 of the 3 co-founders were technical, right? So we didn't need to hire developers on day one. And the thing that we wanted to do was offer software and services. And there was nothing standing away from doing that. And by bootstrapping, we were able to prove that we can actually run a business, like not just kind of like convince people that we have some dream, but actually run a real business. And that was really, really important for me. I think so much in kind of entrepreneurship is not talked about how much is actually required to run a business. I'm not talking about specific to your startup or your niche or your industry. No, a business. Like, do you have a killer accountant? What about lawyers, right? What do you do then? How do you write contracts? How do you send invoices? What about an office? How do you hire people? How do you do performance reviews, right? I'm not even talking about things that are specific to, your actual industry. Like, do you know how to do any of this stuff? And on day one, we didn't know how we were going to do these things. We only had the experience of being, employees in other businesses. And in many cases, we didn't like those things weren't done, or we didn't have a hand in doing them, or we didn't like how they were being done. Right. So it's not like we had this kind of solid foundation of this is how I run a business. And I could say that the first couple of years of ThoughtLeaders was really about honing those specific skills and less about anything in our actual niche. So that's what bootstrapping really did for me. I will add one thing though, that I don't think that that bootstrapping is like, I don't think that we are today like these hardcore crusaders of bootstrapping the way that it was at the beginning. It was really, really important that starting out that way. But times have also changed significantly since 2017. And I would say that I think that today when you raise money, it can be done a bit differently than it was done back then. So I don't have such a radical hardcore view about it the way I did a few years ago.
I see your point. And can you elaborate maybe on that? Like what for you, in your opinion, has changed and kind of like how you see it right now?
So one of my main things was I didn't want someone like heavily being involved in our business. Today, there's investors that don't want board seats. I mean, that was like something that maybe it existed back then, but I was talking with a friend who just raised like a very large round, and like, oh, okay, so like your life is over, right? He's like, no, they didn't even want a board seat. I'm like, what? At that amount of money? What are you talking about, right? That's one thing. Another thing, which is pretty crazy, is and I read your post about this also about a secondary sales, right? Yeah. So doing a secondary round. I mean, you know this better than I do, but doing a secondary round 5 years ago, right, was like a crazy dream, right? I bet when starting Lemless, you weren't saying like the goal
we're gonna sell 20%.
Yeah, right. That was the thinking. The thing that was different, even a few years ago was like, okay, if I take investors, then on paper, I've like theoretically made money, right? But I haven't actually made more money until we get to the very end of this very difficult road that we probably will never get to. Yeah. And now with secondary rounds involved, it's like, wait a second, you mean that you're going to kind of like back off and still let me run my business? You're going to also give me a life-changing amount of money along the way. That's like a really different offering than it used to be.
Yeah. And I think, as you mentioned, I think what's really interesting is what I love right now with the ecosystem is actually you're talking 5 years ago, but even like a year ago, like people were taking 100% cash out, especially like in SaaS. It didn't exist. Like when we accepted it, I think there were maybe like, I know maybe 1 or 2 startups that did it, but that's it. And right now, because, we talked a lot about it, like the article and everything, like it's every time, a startup does something, it set a standard. Because what's super interesting also I see is like back then, the people who were investing in startup were essentially like venture capitals, like VCs who wanted to go heavily on the risk, only money in the company, putting a lot of pressure. You need to raise more. I want a seed, I want a board seat, etc., etc. But now you have people coming down, so like private equity, growth equity, and they need to compete with all these VC firms. So for them, they're like, I'm an investor. I don't give a fuck. Like you've been running a business to like 10 million in ARR and above. Like, why would I tell you like how to do things? Like I'm a fucking investor. Like you're the one running the business. However, I want to do 10x. So are you capable of doing 10x with your growth? If the answer is yes, I want to bet on you. And their bet is just, I buy shares in the company, you do you, and in 5 to 10 years or whatever, whenever there is like this magical exit or IPO or whatever, then, like I will have made really good money. And I think like, it's really interesting to see how things have evolved from, like 5 or 6 years ago until now.
I think that also, at its core, the secondary offerings just help align incentives a lot more because, right, you had these like, in the past you had these like, the investor comes along, super rich person, they're like, doesn't need money, right? I mean, they're throwing around money in startups that probably will never make it. So, doesn't need money. And then unless we're talking about like a seasoned, entrepreneur who's had multiple exits, right? The average entrepreneur, like young, hasn't had a crazy exit yet, like working their ass off and like, their salary really matters, or, the day-to-day money really matters. You have just like such opposite extremes here. You have people who are like, look, I'm not even talking about being rich. I just want to be able to buy a house, right? Or like live like, and be like semi-comfortable so I don't spend my days like worrying about my next paycheck, right? So you had such opposite extremes. So to be able to kind of like bridge that gap a little bit, I think really kind of aligns incentives and makes the relationship that much better, right? I mean, the investor who wants 10x could be pushing the entrepreneur to not sell or get acquired, at what could be a crazy amount of money for the entrepreneur, but is not a drop in the bucket for the investor. Yeah.
No, that's true. That's very true. And I want to go because like this topic is super interesting, but there are also tons of things I want to pick your brain because I know like you are kind of an expert in the sponsored content and also like influencer marketing. So how has it been like kind of helpful for you? Like, first thing first, for everyone listening who doesn't really know like what sponsored content and influencer marketing is, can you maybe like give a generic like a introduction to it, and then we'll dig into how to actually apply it to your business?
Sure, definitely. So sponsored content is when a brand makes a connection with a content creator to feature that brand inside of the content. So you've probably seen this on YouTube or in podcasts where the actual video the creator will mention something about the brand. When it's done really well and when it's really powerful is when that integration of the brand feels natural to the content. So there's a YouTuber who I really like and we work with a lot. His name is Adam Ragusia. He does amazing sponsorships. He's a big at-home chef YouTuber. And anyone who likes to cook, I highly recommend you checking him out. So he'll be doing a recipe. Like he has a recipe for some like teriyaki salmon. And as he's cooking the salmon, and it feels so natural, he says, by the way, like I ordered this salmon from my favorite salmon delivery site. And he talks about what they do and the differences between different types of salmon and how they cook. And if you order this type of salmon versus that type of salmon, then you need this different heat versus that type of heat. And so it's really important that he discloses that it's paid, and he does. But the whole, let's call it like the sponsorship is actually valuable content to the viewer. I came to this video because I saw he's going to teach me some recipe for salmon. And in that video, he shows me how to make the different types of salmon and what to put on them. Oh, and by the way, he also tells me where he orders his salmon from. That's the ad, right? Where he orders it from. So I'm
hungry now.
So the beautiful thing about sponsored content and why I'm so passionate about it and is because the whole power of it is in doing these really natural integrations. That's when a brand just fits into the content that I came to watch anyway. So that means that a brand today, most brands when they're doing advertising are doing things like they're tracking users around the internet, right? Like Google's monitoring your search history, Facebook seeing like where you've been, your location data, your friend data, right? And they're essentially spying on you, all for the purpose of trying to like target you with ads that they think you'll like. But the beauty of sponsored content is that, no, I consciously went and clicked on this video to watch. I picked this podcast episode to listen to. And inside of the thing that I chose to watch, you've given me now an ad for something that I consciously want to see. So I think that's pretty cool. And I think that that's a really good direction for the internet and for content creation as a whole. And that's why we really focus on it.
Yeah, I mean, I really like everything you've said. And the thing like for me is that maybe like another part is about for the creators, because the truth is like whenever there is an ad that has been run, etc., it's like as customer, we kind of like are fed up of all of that. Like we don't choose it. It's very like intrusive, etc. But again, like right now, if you look at how much people were paid on YouTube, they were not making a living. Like very few people could actually make a living from YouTube. But now with this, like sponsoring, you have like TikTok creators, you have Instagram creators, you have people like building newsletters, etc. And I think it goes in the right direction, as you said, because more money for creators mean better content or more helpful content. And in the end, it's just a win-win-win,
Totally. It's more money for creators, and that money is coming from the right place, right? So that's really what we focus on, and I believe would be a very, very good future for the internet and for everybody if the ads we were seeing were actually things that we consciously picked.
Yeah, I agree. And do you feel like how have you seen, because you've been in the game for quite some time, so how have you seen like everything evolving? Because back then I would say like at some point even some creators were just like showcasing products, not saying that it was advertising. Like have you seen like the sponsoring evolving over time, or do you feel like there is still like a lot of room for improvements? And based on that, what's the best way to do a campaign?
Yeah, so the industry is definitely maturing. It's maturing very rapidly, but it still has a long ways to go, right? I don't think we're anywhere near like the peak, both in terms of the amount that's being done, but also in terms of like the standardization of it, right? Because in like a super mature industry, you would see tons of standardization and also tons of options, and where we're at now, there's still people, you mentioned disclosure. So there's still content creators that aren't disclosing things properly. I think on the most basic level it's still really difficult to actually get a single sponsorship done. We have this kind of flow chart that we use internally for the process to run one single sponsorship. And it's start to finish, everything that you need to do from the point of thinking about which content creator you want to work with, how you talk to them, how you reach out to them, how you negotiate, how you agree, how you close the deal, how you give them the assets and the talking points and the things that they need, how something goes live, checking that it's live, payments, how those are done. The flowchart is crazy. I'm talking about for one single sponsorship, we have like something like 50 or 60 different points along the way. And what we've been doing is basically trying to automate the shit out of that and knock that down from, those 60 points being like manual to be eventually get them all to be things that can happen through our platform. We still have a ways to go. And I think where we're at is pretty reflective of the entire industry. So what really excites me is if we can add not just if we can add standardization and ease to this, but not simplification. We need to make it, we need to keep options. We need to give the ability to customize, but we need to make it easy to do so. And that's where I see the industry going. And I think that's also a great direction for everyone, because if we can customize the way things are, let's say how payments are done. A lot of brands today will tell a creator like, I want to buy something from you, but I will only pay you out 60 days after the thing went live, right? And they hold a lot of leverage over the content creator because they have the money. So things like this, without any kind of standardization or ease of platforms to handle it, means that content creators can be left kind of waiting, 60 days after they publish something to even get paid for it. And there's all sorts of kind of cracks along the way in the flow between a creator and a brand that I think we need to fill in.
I think that's, I understand like the challenges, and as you discussed, I'm super intrigued, to understand like the process, and maybe not go over like the 60 points, but let's say I'm like a company, a brand. I want to run like influencer marketing. What's the best way to do it? Like, how would you go from setting up the goals and objectives up to like running the campaign? Like, how long does that take? What is the process?
Yeah. So setting the goals and objectives is extremely important. What we like to do with the clients that we work with is make sure that they are able to track very clearly their sponsorships and be able to understand the effectiveness of it. So that's important that they have, let's say, landing pages set up. They're able to make vanity URLs and able to understand which sponsorships are working for them, which ones are not. That's super important to make sure is set up at the very beginning so that you can quickly iterate and double down on the stuff that's working and remove the stuff that's not. In terms of so the next thing is to figure out what you should be doing, what kind of content you should be sponsoring. So we like to look at that from a few different ways. One way is competitive intelligence. And one of the things that ThoughtLeaders enables is the ability to basically track where any brand is being mentioned, both organically and sponsored. So when I say competitive intelligence, we can look at your direct competitors, but it depends on the company, the niche, the industry. It's possible that your direct competitors haven't yet built out a really robust, content creator or sponsorship strategy. So we should also look at companies that maybe have a similar price point or could be going after a similar audience as you. And what we can do, because we track whether a brand was mentioned in the content and also whether it was organically mentioned or sponsored, we can look at the places that they've been sponsored and repeat. And we can use that as a signal as those places are working for them. Those are the positive signals. And places that they've sponsored and are not repeating, we can say, in most cases, this is a negative signal that it didn't work for them. And with that as kind of a guide, we can then say, okay, let's look at the places that worked, and let's look at maybe in some cases sponsoring these exact content creators, the ones that worked for them, or let's look for ones that are really similar to them. And places that didn't work, that can also give us ideas of to maybe different genres of content that we shouldn't go after. Things that might seem like a good idea, but don't end up working out. For example, sometimes we see that a brand thinks that they're really going to fit in with like family YouTube channels, for example. They're like, oh, I know that my audience is all families. It's possible that might be what you think your audience is, but maybe those channels on average have really, really high price points. And just at those price points for you, it doesn't get you the customer acquisition cost that you need. So competitive intelligence and looking at what other brands are doing is a great way to figure out what you should be doing. The other thing we like to do is kind of set a framework for buying. In YouTube, and we do a lot of YouTube. We also do a lot of podcasts, but I'll talk about just YouTube specifically. We like to set an average cost per view that the brand should be thinking about spending. And this is super average, and it's just kind of a way to build a framework to help make decisions. I'm not saying you should, use this as like this super rigid metric and never go around it, but just kind of a framework to help you make decisions. But set that average cost per view, and it depends on the type of brand. It depends on the type of content they're going to be in order to figure out the what makes sense for them. And we can also play with that over time and see, if our framework was, let's say, 4 cents per view, and we see that we're constantly coming in with sponsorships that are not returning for us what we need, then maybe we need to lower that a bit. Then
so just to be clear on the tracking side, because maybe people are not so familiar with how it can be tracked. Typically, like an influencer would talk about a product, say that, hey, you know what, like guys, like if you want a coupon or discount or whatever, check out the link. And the link is where you're going to track all the orders and everything. Is that correct? Or do you do it in another way?
Yeah, definitely. Okay. You mentioned a couple ways it could be tracked. It could be tracked by a coupon code. So maybe in the checkout, they have a place to enter a coupon code, and they also give the audience an incentive to use the code, some sort of discount, as opposed to just buying without the code. So they can say, if they use this creator's code, then it must have came from there. That's not 100% perfect all the time, but it's good enough, right? It's a really good way to track. Another way you can track is you can have different landing pages, and there's a lot of tools now that let you build out a kind of like custom landing pages, so you can have a different URL for each one of them. And then even just using like Google Analytics or another website tracking software, you can say, these purchases landed on this page first, and I know that came from that creator. Another thing that can be done is you can put like a vanity URL or a tracking URL inside of the description or even in the video itself. And then when someone clicks on that, it redirects them to the other page. So similar to landing page version of tracking, you don't actually need to make a whole brand new landing page. You just need to put a URL that does a redirect. So those are some really good ways and pretty easy ways to set up for tracking. And none of them are 100% perfect, but the idea is that we can get a good idea if this is working or not.
Nice. And do you feel like influencer marketing is for every type of company, like from B2B SaaS up to like, like B2C, like we've seen like in B2C with, like health, et cetera, or like fitness or like, like cosmetics. We see a lot of influencers, but do you feel like there is a potentially like huge opportunity for new waves of influencers? Because if we talk about like SaaS, for example, like softwares, like the number of influencers is not as high, I would say, that in the cosmetics or fashion industry. So do you feel like it's appropriate for every brand to do it, or is there like brand that for them that it's working better?
Okay, so there's a lot of brands in the world, right? So to say anything is appropriate for everyone, I don't know if I would go that far. But more specifically, is it appropriate for SaaS companies? I would say yeah, but with a caveat, right? So like the companies that have been earliest adopters of influencer marketing and sponsorships have been typically direct to consumer brands that have a digital presence that are focused on the United States audience. That's been the kind of, let's say, the earliest adopters and the ones that have gone like all in on this right away. Now from that, there's a lot of other brands and types of companies that can get a lot of value from this. So even a B2B SaaS company, you mentioned there might not be as many content creators out there that could be relevant for them, or producing content that has to do with their niche of B2B software, as let's say a direct to consumer food company, right? Which the audience like everyone that lives in their shipping radius, right? So there, that's true. There's definitely not as much. I think one of the things that sponsored content can be really good for, though, is that it gives you a chance to really tell the story of your brand, and it gives you a chance to kind of have like these kind of like ambassadors for your brand. So it's not necessarily easy to find them. So So let's say like in the case of Limblist, right? Like there are a bunch of YouTubers who are talking about like email marketing, right? Now they don't have as many subscribers as someone like Mr. Beast does. That's true, right? And there's definitely less of them, but there's definitely people that are doing this. But I would extend that even further. I would say that just because the software is specifically doing email marketing or whatever, doesn't mean that the only type of content that is relevant for you is specifically videos or podcasts that talk about actually, writing emails and sending it through software. No, like anything that has to do with, let's say, marketing as a whole could be, right? And taking that one step further. What about sales? Okay. And taking that one step further. What about like entrepreneurship and small businesses, right? So we can start kind of expanding the range of what is relevant. But I think the root of your question is like, does every company have an endless supply of content and an infinite budget that they can dump into this? Probably not. And I also don't think that that like influencer content or sponsorships or any type of marketing for that matter should be like the only thing any company does, right? But what I can say, and taking just YouTube as an example, obviously influencer marketing deals with more than just YouTube. I mean, YouTube by itself has a massive viewer base, massive audience. So, I mean, if you thought that your brand could possibly make it on TV or the radio, or if it would make sense to have a billboard for your brand, then like it obviously makes sense to put it on YouTube where things are trackable, where you can zoom in on specific niches for you. I mean, I was in the airport last week and I saw billboards in the airport for like random B2B software companies all over the place. I get that there are business travelers, but this is like a billboard, right? I mean, if you can do this, then you can you can put yourself on, some YouTube or some influencer content.
No, that's really interesting. I think was in the airport and so like something about, I guess Zoho CRM or this type of thing. Like they do some companies are advertising like everywhere. It's quite funny.
But it's a billboard for compliance software. Like, come on, tell me how many people went through the airport that day that were like, they're arguing.
This is what I need.
But you know what? Like, I'm not saying to that company's credit, I'm not saying it was a bad idea. Like, I do bet that a person who was their hardcore target did walk through that airport and probably did see that, right?
And we are talking about it right now, which means that it caught our attention as well. So it's like,
Yeah. So I think the other thing to think about here is that not every company has the same customer acquisition cost they're willing to pay for, right? So in the case of that compliance software company, I bet that they're looking for like, that one CFO, right? If that CFO sees that
just
billboard,
need one.
I mean, they're willing to pay thousands of dollars for that right person if they will see it,
Yeah, I agree.
So I think if you look at influencer marketing in the same way for those type of B2B software companies, it can be really effective.
And what's your feeling about, building relationship with your influencers? Because, you talked about, I think it was really interesting, all the part about how to spot them, how to do like the competitive or intelligence analysis, see what's working, check your competitors or people who have like similar niche, etc. And I think this is tons of like actionable and really cool insights. But once you have found like this gold nuggets of influencers, like what's the approach? Like what's the best approach? Like would you have tips on how to build like a long-lasting relationship, or is it something that's easier to go through like a partner, or what's the best way to do it?
So I'm so happy you asked this question, because when we started talking, this was something wanted to. I was thinking to myself, like, I want to make sure I bring that up, and I completely forgot about it as we started talking here. And thank you. So so we talked about like more technicalities, like how do I get this running? But I think that this is where the gold is in sponsored content, influencer marketing, is not like finding someone one time, running one thing with them that they kind of talk about your brand and then like moving on, right? That's the whole special thing that's different. This isn't, it's not just like programmatic advertising. It's not banner ads, not billboards, right? It's something that you have an actual relationship with the person who's going to be talking about your brand. and they have a crazy important relationship with an audience, right? That's what you're leveraging here. So if you can figure out how to have a real partnership with them and get them to want to be that kind of ambassador for your brand, get them to want to care about your brand more than just kind of like talk about it and move on, then you can really do stuff that's first of all, can decrease the risk for your brand. You know that this stuff is going to work on a consistent basis for you. And you can also lock down that kind of content or those content creators as opposed to having your competitors in there and take over. And you can really get like someone's entire audience on your side. The other thing is that, and I can say as a buyer, my personal experience is that there are many content creators that I really listen to and or watch their content, and I hear about their ads. And the first time I hear about it, I'm like, oh, cool. I really like them. I trust if they're talking about a brand that it's probably a pretty good brand. But I just don't have a need for it right now. And then I hear it again from them, and then again from them, and then you know what? A year has gone by, and suddenly I do have a need for it. Right? I didn't need that email marketing software, a year ago when I was an employee at a company, but now I'm like starting my own company, and I'm like, oh, that's right. Lemlist. They've been talking about Lemlist forever, and then I go to it. So
you're staying top of mind, and this is like the key, essentially.
Yeah. And I don't mean that you have to keep buying every single ad with that creator forever, but the fact that I've heard it a few times, the creators explained it in different ways, the creators made it relevant for me and explained how the creator themselves uses the product. That's a really good partnership. The other thing that you can do, so when you find something that's working, right, as a brand, you probably want to test something out before you're going all in with a crazy commitment. But let's say you test it out, you buy 1 sponsorship, 3 sponsorships, and it's working, right? You see some traction there. Then what you can do is you can say, all right, let's talk with that creator and like, what ideas does the creator have? A lot of times creators are coming back to brands and they're like, I always wanted to make this video about how to do images inside of emails. Like that's something like I always wanted to do, and I've been thinking about making this video. You're like, no way! Like that would be a great thing for me to sponsor. Like that's a piece of content that is super relevant to my brand, and you're going to actually make a video. I'm not just talking about a 30-second ad. You're talking about a whole video that's going to explain something that uses my product, and you're going to show people, and you're going to, as you're going through it, you're going to teach them how to use my product. That can be a really powerful thing. So this is the kind of stuff that really gets people kind of over the line and want to try out that brand. And creators are much more willing and interested in doing this type of stuff when you've shown them as a brand that you're willing to partner with them for the long term. Yeah. So I think that's definitely it's key to a successful sponsorship program is actually getting those partnerships. One more thing I'll say is that we see from since we're tracking how brands are working with creators, even the brands that are not using our platform, we see from public data what they're doing. We see that most brands that have built up a really large sponsorship program, they have this kind of like test budget, like some new creators every month that they're trying out, but the creators that work for them, they're going back to for years, and they're putting tons of money into them. So in a given month, a brand like Skillshare or HelloFresh, brands that have like really done tons with sponsorships, the vast majority of their budget for a month is spent not on like brand new creators. It's spent on creators that they've already built these partnerships with, already tested out in the past, and they're just coming back to and repeating with.
Nice. Yeah, no, and I guess it makes sense, like once you have these relationships working and you know that you're getting like a good ROI and people are enjoying it, I think it's definitely like interesting. Well, I mean, we got so much actionable things. I think it's my brain right now is just like fusing. I want to be also cautious of your time, and I think something that people usually also love in this podcast, on top of all the really cool insights you gave us on influencer marketing, how to start like a campaign, find the right persons, build relationship in the long run and also like track, your returns. Your story is really like inspiring. You grew like really fast. You knew exactly like what the industry, you built kind of like a product for yourself. And I'm always curious, we all have like kind of like downs during like our past as an entrepreneur. What was for you like the one or two like toughest moments you faced, and how did you overcome like the challenge?
I can tell you a couple of them. So one of them, we had a really large client with us from pretty early on. That was one of the things that really helped us grow in the early days. And that's also something that, by the way, people don't talk about enough, is that one of the ways that, especially in bootstrapping, that you can really grow is if you find, right, you need to do money from the first day, but it's if you can find like a really large client that kind of like almost acts as like an investor in you, right? Like you're working really closely with them. They're telling you like, oh, I this feature I need, this is a thing I need you to build out for me. You're even developing business models with them. That can be really valuable. So we had that pretty early on. And it was client was like crazy rapid growth company. Like they were just on fire, and we were really riding that wave with them. And they, just to kind of like signal how much they were on fire, the contact that we started working with in their marketing department switched, I think 5 or 6 times to new people, because that contact got like layered up. And was hired someone under them. Not even like, I don't know if they were technically like promotions even. It was like, they just hired someone under them, who hired someone under them, who hired, I'm talking 5 or 6 times in a span of like 2.5, 3 years.
Oh, that's crazy.
And then eventually they left us. And that was really tough. I mean, they were like, really the golden goose, and that was really scary also. And it was, kind of something where you're like, man, like, like really thinking like, how did they leave us? Like, are we worthless? Like, what's going on? That was really hard. I can say though, that at the time I didn't feel this way, but after it happened, I'm super happy it did, because first of all, because they were such a large portion of our revenue, we were always kind of like living on the edge. Like there was always this fear that they could leave. So when it finally happened, that like fear came true. Yeah. And the thing that I had been like fearing for so much, right? Because even before it had come true, I was still fearing it. And I was like, things were going well, but I was freaking out that it might happen. And when it finally happened, it actually wasn't as horrible as I thought, right? Like it also I think really set us in a good direction. Like at the beginning, it was amazing to have them, and I wouldn't have changed that. But the benefits they brought at the beginning, when they were like kind of controlling our product direction and like giving us feature requests, started to clash a little bit with what we actually wanted to do and what the other users wanted. And I think that as we started to like not be totally aligned on that got worse and worse. So when they left at the time, it was super hard. I was like, oh my God, are we going to run out of money? Even thinking to myself, like, just, okay, even if we don't run out of money, like it's just going to be so hard for us to get back onto like that sexy growth graph, right? The money was going up and up and up, and now it's such a dip. And it's like, even if we bring on a bunch of new customers, like when will we come back over that? But we did, and we got through that.
And I think it must feel great also, like, because as you said, you had like, if you have one person like paying you that much, it means that every time they're going to say something or be unhappy or whatever, like you're putting the entire team under a lot of pressure. However, if you have like, when they're gone and you see like kind of your growth coming back, and then, like passing that stage that you were, I think like this feeling must have been like the best, no?
Yeah, it definitely was. I can tell you though, I really don't want to like make this sound like because we're probably like 2 years or so past this now. So now I'm looking at it like 2 years later, like, okay, things moved on. They're great. Yeah. I mean, at the time I was freaking out. It totally sucked. Like, I don't want to like sugarcoat it. Right. It was like really scary, really bad. And yeah, getting over it also wasn't like a one day thing. Right. Because they're such a big client. It was like, it took time. It took like rethinking about, business models. It took probably, I don't know, maybe probably like 2 quarters or so to like come back over that. Like if not more. So it was definitely a struggle. I really don't want to sugarcoat it. But in the long run, it was amazing for us that it happened. I think at the time there was something like 40% of our total company revenue, something like this. At some points, huge. they might even been more than that at certain points, right? I think at the time they left, they were probably like 40%. So that's just like it was just super scary. But again, something I will say is that I was so afraid of this happening, and that fear was like stuck with me all the time. So when they finally did leave and I had to actually face it, it wasn't just theoretical anymore. It was like, no, it's here. They left. That's it. Now you have to deal with it. It wasn't, we dealt with it, right? We got through it. And it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. So that was definitely a down. I can tell you other things that are probably like, maybe less like specific, but we've had big like product or feature launches that we thought we were going to be like, game changing. This is it. Like we finally nailed it, like for sure. And then, we kind of launched it and we're just like, womp womp, crickets. That's happened a couple times.
Us too. Been there.
It could be, that could be, as that could be super demoralizing. I think that it's important just to remember like that's part of the game. And I think that both of those things, the customer and the features that kind of don't pan out, what I've taken away from that is that so much of this entrepreneurship game is just survival, right? So like, obviously we have to survive as bootstrapping companies, but even if you're not, even if you raise money, I mean, it's just about surviving. Like, can you stick it out and grind it out like longer than everyone else? Sometimes that's the thing. If you can, because we've been able to stay around, there's some benefits I think that happen over time to a company that just kind of compound. And it's really hard to notice that compounding in the moment or on like a given month or given, quarter or even a year. But over, we're now 4 or 5 years into this, and you just start looking, you're like, actually the amount of new customers we get every month now that are like referrals from previous customers is like really significant.
It's
and that's
huge,
something, that's something like I remember in the first year we're setting up Salesforce and we're looking at like lead source. We're like, ooh, referral. Let's put that, right? And in the first year, you're trying to track like lead sources from referrals. You have like one, right? Like one opportunity that ends up being closed and lost, right? And that's the kind of thing, like over 5 years, it starts compounding. Like, wait a minute. We probably got like maybe like 10% or so of our new customers now, maybe even more, are coming like our word of mouth referrals, right? Or you asked about, like you talked about like content and creating content, right? That's also something that really just, you can't expect to like put up a blog on your company site and actually get value from that like anytime soon, right? That's something like if you grind it out and do it for a long, long time and you do it well and you keep it going, even when you're not seeing any results from it, after a long time, it's going to start paying a little bit of value back, right? But if you do that for like 5 years consistently and suddenly like, oh shit, we got a bunch of traffic to our blog. Survival I think is the thing.
I think like what you mentioned is so true. And I do feel like with all the media and everything right now, talking about like these companies who go from zero to being unicorn thanks to like huge round of fundings in just like 1 year, 2 years, etc. Like people lose sight of, like the reality of things. And I really enjoy the stories where people have been grinding like for years and years and years. And then they start seeing everything compounding. And then, like the growth just like skyrockets. So I agree, like it's a game of survival, grind, consistency. And I think like, what you've achieved is really impressive. And I'm sure like the growth will continue that way. In order for us like to kind of like wrap up, I usually ask like 3 questions. The first one is, what book would you recommend to another entrepreneur?
Ooh, okay. So can I answer this in like a couple parts? I'm in the middle of reading the Will Smith I'm listening to the Will Smith autobiography now on Audible.
It's called The Slap.
So I actually started listening to this before that happened, and I'm in the middle of it as this happened. So that was like really crazy time for me. But I really like that, so I would recommend that. One thing I'll say that I took away from that is he was like really successful early on, and so that part I can't really relate with, right? Like he just like instant success from like basically the time he was a teenager. But he talks a lot about like what you actually need to do after you've like achieved the things that you're going for. And that gave me a lot of perspective, because I'm like a lot of times running towards these kind of like dreams where you think like you're not really living in the present, and you think that if I get there, then it's all going to be great for me. And that kind of set a lot of perspective for me of like, oh, I don't know if, I think I need to actually focus on some things in the present rather than just like chasing dreams in the future. And one last book I'll give is that I really liked, especially for, I guess, like leaders or about leadership, was The Ride of a Lifetime, the Bob Iger book. He just in that book talks about like a few key decisions that happened as he was the CEO of Disney. And for me, one of the biggest takeaways was like, he wraps up this kind of like crazy career as, a CEO into these like few fairly like kind of like simple events, right? There's like a few decisions. There, I would say like 3 major acquisitions he did, and the decision to go into streaming. It's like basically that's kind of like the whole thing, right? But he talks about like thinking about them, how long they took, what went into that, and how different things could have been. And that really kind of gave me perspective on, okay, as CEO, I find that a lot of times I'm like running around and trying to do all these small decisions all the time. And I'm kind of like trying to just like put out today's fire. And you have to get away from that and really focus on like the few big decisions that actually matter. I will say that I'm still trying to figure out how to do this. So it's not that I just like read that book and it was all solved for me, but it was a great book. I really enjoyed it.
Nice. Love. We'll definitely like check this out. And second question would be, who is like the one Bootstrap founder you kind of like admire or follow?
Ooh, I have always been a fan of ConvertKit. And
Nathan Barry, yeah.
Yeah. So I know the kind of similar area as you, but I mean, he's just been around for a long time, writing really good content about.
We're not doing the same thing. Like, yeah, they're really on the like email marketing, and we're more like sales automation. But it's I love Nathan.
By the way, we're actually customers of both of you.
That's cool.
Yeah, but so I've really enjoyed his stuff. Also, Jason Farid and DHH of 37 Signals and Basecamp. I haven't as much been into their stuff recently, but Nathan Barry's stuff, I'm still like reading his newsletter all the time.
Nice.
And also he talks really nicely about how to set up like incentives within the company, pay structures, and just like really practical kind of open advice about how to have technically set up a bootstrapped team. Yeah,
he's really cool guy. And final question is, how do you regain energy when you're facing challenges or tough times?
Ooh, that's a good question. Man, I wish I had like a silver bullet, or like a, just kind of like a, I don't know, a pod to like walk into and.
If you're in Tel Aviv, maybe it's just like good falafel or something.
Yeah, I think so. First of all, I think it's a super important question. I definitely think that sometimes there's like, just bad energy. You just kind of have like these peaks and valleys, and sometimes you're in the valley and like, and just morale is low, vibe sucks, people are unhappy, like that happens. Knowing that for me, so because it's happened a few times, I could say both like on a personal level and also really in like the company's history. And also a lot of times those things overlap, right? Sometimes like you're having a bad time personally and it reflects in the company, or the company's having a bad time and it reflects personally. So knowing that it's going to end and like you're going to get out of it. That's something that I tell myself now. And I think that kind of helps. It doesn't get me out of it like immediately, but just knowing that like this is a temporary thing and it's going to be better kind of gives you that I guess like freedom to feel like it's okay to feel bad today, because I'm not just like being like depressed forever. Like, okay, it's going to end. There's a light at the end of this tunnel. You need to like tell yourself that this is a temporary thing. It happens to everyone and it's going to be better.
Love this. Well, David, thanks a lot for sharing all those tips. And where can people actually follow you and follow your journey?
So I post most often on LinkedIn. You can follow me on LinkedIn or connect to me on LinkedIn. And you can also check out ThoughtLeaders at thoughtleaders.io. And it's something I'm pretty proud of. If anyone is kind of in the marketing space, we have a company newsletter. And it's a newsletter about marketing that happens to be written by our company. It's not like it's information only about like what the company does. It's about the industry. And we got over 2,500 opted-ins, like regular subscribers. Not talking about just like customers or something we put on an email list, that opted in to read this marketing content every week. So if that's something you're interested into, then I would say check that out on thoughtleaders.io/newsletter.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, David. Have an awesome day.
Thank you for having me.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Bootstrap Stories, the only podcast where bootstrap entrepreneurs share their journey in all transparency. If you enjoyed this episode, don't hesitate to leave us a review. And in case you want to see the interview, all episodes are live on the YouTube channel. Check out the link in the description and hit subscribe if you haven't already. Have an amazing day and make sure to also join us in our amazing Bootstrap community where we all helped each other to become successful and grow a profitable business. Take care and talk to you soon.